Honda has a long history of creating some of the most exotic motorcycles ever to grace the planet, but many of these have been for racing only and not available to the general public. All that changed in 1992 when Honda released the NR750 to the public. You see, back in 1992 when the NR750 was unveiled, motorcycles were still incredibly crude compared to those of today. Even range-topping superbikes used carburetors rather than fuel injection, and carbon fiber was only used on race bikes. But the NR750 was different, and on top of all the race spec parts the bike had, Honda did something special inside the engine that no street bike had ever seen before. The engine inside the NR750 surprised the industry when it was first released. Why? Well, it was a smart step by Honda to overcome a big problem that it was facing in the industry at the time. They created an engine with a totally unique piston inside. The pistons had an oval shape and it looked like two pistons merged into one, making a V4 engine that had 4 pistons but 8 connecting rods. Why? Why did they do this? Why did they not just make a V8 engine, as it would have been easier, taken up the same amount of space, and it would have made the same amount of power if not more? Well, to answer this, we have to take ourselves back in time. In the late 70s, two-stroke engines were the norm in all motorbikes. They were powerful enough to produce up to 120 horsepower, and they were nice and lightweight, making them great for racing. But Honda didn't like them. Honda wanted to use a 4-stroke engine in their race bike, and they started designing a 4-stroke engine for the NR500 MotoGP bike. This wasn't an easy task, as the 2-stroke engines were lighter and produced more power than 4-stroke ones. So Honda would have to come up with something new that gave them an advantage without breaking any rules. So the Honda engineers read up the rulebooks and saw the bikes were only allowed to have 4 combustion chambers, so they could only use 4 pistons, and the cc was not allowed to exceed 500 cc's. But there were no rules on valves, spark plugs or connecting rods, so Honda decided to build a V8 engine to get the massive amount of power needed, but in the form of a V4. Using 2 corn rods for each oval piston meant that the engine could have 32 valves in total, and because of this, an increase in air-fuel mixture per cylinder was achieved, producing a greater compression rate. And this higher compression rate equals more power. So in essence they cheated the system. In 1979, Honda put this engine into a Grand Prix racing bike, the NR500. Now this engine revved all the way to 23,000 RPM and it made 130 horsepower at 20,000 RPM. But even with the increased power, the 2-stroke engines kept their dominance. The oval piston engines did not perform well on the racetrack. You see, this engine did make a good amount of power for the time, but weight was the downside. With its bigger cylinder head, the 4-stroke engine weighed more than the 2-stroke engines by 20 kilograms. Because of the added bulk around the head, the engine's center of gravity and overall balance was affected. Then, in 1987, Honda released the NR750R, this time in the form of a 750cc V4. At the time, the NR750R was the most powerful and technologically sophisticated 4-stroke racer. Unfortunately, by this time, oval piston cylinders were outlawed by the FIM, so the NR750R was always going to be a novelty. Ultimately, instead of creating a race replica, Honda marketed the NR750 as an extraordinary expensive collector's bike. So in 1992 they released it to the public, making only 200 bikes at $50,000 a pop. Now this bike was marketed as a once in a lifetime opportunity to own a bike with Honda's oval piston technology, which was true racing tech. So the bike was supposed to be like the ultimate street bike with true track performance. Was it? Well, no, unfortunately. Although it was really cool, cheaper bikes of the time made around the same power, and they were lighter and much more reliable. But why? Why was it such a big flop? Why did it only produce 125 horsepower? I mean, that's the same type of power an ordinary 4-stroke 750cc bike produced. Well, Honda said that the power could easily have been increased to over 140 horsepower, but Honda decided to restrict the output to improve the longevity and rideability, figuring rider comfort and control were more important than absolute racetrack prowess. So they made them slower, so that the bikes would last longer. You see, when the engine speed exceeded, a problem known as sudden disintegration would arise. The twisting of the connecting rods was the main problem. Unlike a regular piston, an oval piston has two connecting rods. These rods would distort as the engine speed increased, pulling the piston pin out of its proper orientation and causing the parts to break. You see, when you build a race bike, it doesn't have to last forever. If it breaks, you can fix it. And if it breaks badly, you just put in a new engine. But when you build a bike for the public, it has to be reliable. You can't sell someone something that destroys itself. And because of this, they had to restrict the bike. The end result was a super cool motorcycle that was underwhelming and extremely expensive. But let me know down below what you think of the NR750 Honda motor. Do you think it's just cool and a novelty and crap, or do you actually think it was one of the best bikes ever? Because as I read through some of the reviews, some people actually said that it was a greatly balanced motorcycle, making a good amount of power and torque. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I've got many more videos on anything car and motorcycle related, so if you like cars or motorcycles, like this is the place to be. Subscribe. I make 3 videos a week, sometimes 4. So yeah, I'll check you guys in the next one. Cheers, eh?